This is Rachel Dworkin from the Chemung County Historical Society. Today is September 8th, 2020, and today for the COVID Memory Project, I am interviewing
Louise Herzl Betz.
Okay, thank you, Louise. I understand you were diagnosed with COVID-19. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience of being ill, how the diagnosis process went, etc.?
Okay, well, I'm actually the first person in Chemung County who tested positive, which doesn't mean I'm the first person who had COVID in Chemung County. but I had been on a trip with my husband to New Zealand, and when we returned, we actually were on 5 different planes and in 6 different airports. So I'm assuming that maybe I picked it up in one of those places, but in any event, we came back on March 7th, I think, and it took about a week for me to get really sick, but my first symptoms were more in the middle of that next week with just extreme fatigue. There was a day when I just kept going back to sleep all day, and but I had a few errands to run, of course, and I actually went to work. I'm a part-time public defender, and I went to court one day and interviewed with clients for the same day. I went to the dentist and I went to the DMV, and those are the places. Sorry. that I visited. As far as I know, I didn't spread my germs anywhere, but in any event, Saturday is when I got really sick, and I didn't have the typical symptoms. And so even though my husband's a doctor, and I called my doctor, and nobody thought that I necessarily had the coronavirus. But I did then later on, I was coughing a little, but I do that a lot because I have allergies and the postnasal drip and all that kind of thing. So we couldn't really make the determination on that basis. I had no idea that I had any kind of lung issues involved. I was exhausted and I was nauseated and was having GI symptoms, and that was about it. But what happened then was the next week I really wasn't eating or drinking anything, maybe one swallow of water at a time. That's all I could manage, and again, just the extreme weakness and that kind of thing. And my husband actually brought a test home from the hospital, but we didn't get the results ever, actually. So that was on a Monday, the 13th, I think, and then on Friday, we finally decided. I remember we called one of the doctors at the Arnott, and he said, "I think you've given it the old college try," because I was becoming completely dehydrated and just simply I couldn't eat anything. And so I went in, and it turns out I had pneumonia, and I think it's called lactase levels were high enough that they would have admitted me anyway. But I was the first COVID patient at the Arnott, and of course, they treated me well, but it was still kind of an experiment at that time. Nobody really knew what was involved except for the experience of New York City. And so I have to say, at that moment, I thought I could die. I didn't really think necessarily that I would, but we just didn't understand the disease at all at that point. And I remember asking the nurse that if you're put on a ventilator, are you asleep? Because I really didn't want to be awake. and anyway, so they basically in the hospital, they did give me antibiotics because that lactase level or whatever that's called often indicates a more serious infection that would probably be bacterial as opposed to the virus. So they gave me that, and that just caused more GI problems for me. So it was kind of a mess, but they gave me fluids with and I guess I was really low in potassium, and I did have pneumonia, which I would never have known. I didn't know I had those symptoms. And so with all of that, the IV drips and all that, I did start to feel better in the sense that I could eat, not a lot, but I was at least able to get some food into me and become rehydrated. And then after 5 days, I guess they decided I could recover on my own at home. So I came home, but honestly, I even said to them, I said, who's going to take care of me? Because my husband was working. And of course, he had to quarantine, but because he's the chief medical officer and he's not actually doing practicing medicine anymore, he was able to do it all from the computer at home and the telephone. And so that worked out for him. But his, he was working 24/7. It was quite involved because it was his job to keep everybody safe in the community and in the hospitals. So then the other thing so then once I got home, I was just really weak and still, didn't necessarily feel much better. And it took about 2 or 3 days after I got home before I thought, okay, I can see that there's some improvement. We are going to, get through this. I think my long-term symptoms are mostly just the fatigue, but I think that's getting better still.
So you're still experiencing the fatigue?
I think so. Sometimes you don't know whether you're just getting older and that's the problem or what. The other thing that happened to me personally was Chemung County had to cut some positions. So I've actually been furloughed till the end of the year, and it's very possible that I won't get that job back, which is fine because, I was actually a person who kind of came out of retirement to do that. And I have a lot of other things to do. I have 4 kids and grandchildren, and, I'm moving around a lot with them. There's something else I was going to say. I can't remember.
Was anyone else in your family taken ill? Your husband or anyone else like that?
That was what I was going to say. By the time a couple days before I went into the hospital, I was coughing a lot. And when you're really sick, you can't control it anymore. It was just, you feel so terrible. And all I kept wanting to do was to fall asleep so I wouldn't feel anything. And I remember saying because he eventually had to get near me, to at least bring me a glass of water or something. And I'm so amazed that he didn't get sick. But he wasn't tested either because that's the other thing. Once I got to the hospital, they told me that the test, that was on a Friday, they told me the test I was given on Monday I wouldn't get results from for 45 days. So they did another test, and that went to a different place, and they were able to get a result within 2 days. Ken wasn't tested until 2 weeks after I got out of the hospital, and he tested negative. But who knows? He said I remember there was one day when he didn't feel good, and he just mostly had a bad headache. So who knows, what that was. I mean, he was under a lot of stress taking care of the hospital and everything. And as far as I know, nobody got it from me, but,
Were they doing contact tracing back then? Did anyone sit down and ask you where did
yeah.
you go? Who did you talk to? And how did that process work?
So what happened was my daughter, who was in Philadelphia or Malvern, Pennsylvania at the time, my kids, were all there. None of them live in Elmira, but they were all involved in what should we do? How do we take care of this? What if something happens to mom? Where are the important papers? That kind of thing. But my daughter actually took it upon herself. She asked me where I had been, and she called all those people and the health department. So they were aware immediately because we took the initiative. And then the thing that was a little I think because it was so early and they didn't really have their system set up really well. Like nobody really gave me instructions when I went home. I mean, I knew things on my own, but you know, for instance, about a couple days after I was home, the health department called. I can't remember exactly when. I think it was a whole week later, actually, and asked if I was taking my temperature every day, and I said no. And she said, "Oh, well, you're supposed to be doing that." Well, I didn't get the piece of paper from them that told me what I was supposed to be doing that I could report back on till at least a week after I got home. So, I wasn't really aware of that. I mean, the hospital gives you something too, but anyway, they did follow up, as far as I know.
Okay.
I know when I went back to the dentist, he thought that I had called them, and I said no. I said that was my daughter who called you. So, and I think they followed. I think they tried to follow up. I really don't have firsthand knowledge of that.
Okay. So you were in the hospital for 5 days, you
Yes.
said? What was the treatment there like? Were you quarantined?
Yes. So they put me in a room that nobody else could come into, and whenever they came in, they were fully shielded. And there's a lot of hand washing and gloves and that whatever that plastic mask is that they wear. And the very first person actually I met in the emergency room, she was really covered up. She had a really special kind of headgear that covered everything, and
Like a hazmat suit?
it kind of looked like that. It wasn't white, but so again, they were very careful. They used new PPE, and then of course they had to come up with better methods, because you can't just keep throwing everything out every time you see a patient for a few minutes. And several people came in to the emergency room when I was first before I was admitted, and they all, went through my history, and so they were just learning, I think, as everyone was in the whole country.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I can't think of anything else that was particular about that. They did, when I left, I wore a mask, and and that was about it. I went out in a wheelchair, and my husband picked me up in one of the back entrances. So, so that was that. But it took a while to feel better. I was, like I said, the first couple of days I thought, why am I not feeling any better? Oh, that was the other thing. There's, I can't remember what it's called now, that thing that you inhale and it's supposed to show your lung capacity. Mm-hmm. And when I was in the hospital, and for at least 2 or 3 days after I got home, I couldn't even make that thing wobble at all. And I was inhaling. I thought, why isn't this working, And then a few days later, I said to my husband, "Oh gosh, look, I made it move." And it took probably a week to get to, where it should be. But that really surprised me. I think that was one of the things that surprised me the most, was that I was just so unaware that I had some of these symptoms. I just felt bad, but, and like I said, I just didn't want to eat or drink. And it's interesting, because I handed my husband my phone, my cell phone. I said, well, I don't want this, I'm just contaminating it further. And, when he dropped me off, and, even though he's an employee, an important employee there, he couldn't come in with me. And, what was I going to say? Oh, I think people were surprised that I didn't want to have my cell phone with me. And my response to that is, at least for me, if you're really sick, you just don't want to be bothered. You can't deal with it. It's just too much. And I had a telephone in the room, so I was able to talk to people eventually, but I remember one of my friends called me and I just said, I'm just really tired, and that's, I'm a pretty talkative person, so, for me not to want to talk to people is an indication of how I was feeling.
Okay. So, what kind of follow-up did the health department have you do other than the take your temperature every day thing that they didn't tell you about until they called you a week after?
Yeah. They just called, let's see, they called, because I had the follow-up visit with the infectious disease person. I think they called again after that. And it was really just to see if I was all right and, I guess let me know that after 2 weeks, I didn't have to be quarantined anymore. And honestly, the moment that they told me that I went to the infectious disease person, and that was 2 weeks after I had been released from the hospital, and he said, you can go about your business and you don't even have to tell anybody that you had this, and that kind of thing. And the reason that I do tell people is because I think there are still people who don't believe that this is real. And, I was very fortunate, but some people are not. And, they have really serious long-term ramifications, whether it's lung disease or heart disease or whatever. And now, as they're discovering that it can just be a problem for your entire body. It's very systemic. But as soon as he told me that, my daughter had called, and she had not been well for probably a month at that point, with what she thought was the flu. Mm-hmm. Because a person that she worked with, one of her colleagues, was very sick, and her children were very sick. And eventually they were tested, but by that time it came back negative, so who knows. And so anyway, she was working from home before everyone was required to work from home. And she just felt so bad that particular day that I said to Ken, okay, I'm getting in the car, I'm going to go down. So I did my 4-hour trip down there, and I stayed with her for a couple of days, and then I brought her home because, I thought it's not as safe in an apartment building where you have to take an elevator with other people. And at that time, no one was wearing masks, and people really were unaware of how serious the problem was. So anyway, I brought her back, but we were both, I still wasn't fully, I would say, myself, and I was just so tired that I couldn't just turn around and bring her back immediately. And she, of course, wasn't feeling well either. So eventually, she did get tested down there, and they got the results very quickly, and she tested negative, but again, she'd been sick for a month, so. Right. It's just hard to know.
Have you done any follow-up to see whether or not you have long-term health impacts other than the tiredness that you're still experiencing?
Yeah, I had a chest x-ray that was ordered by the infectious disease person, but I had that actually 4 weeks after I got out of the hospital. And no one actually has called me about it, so I'm assuming that there were no issues. But there must be a record of it somewhere. So I'm thinking that, at least as far as anybody can tell, there may not be any other issues.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about your COVID experience, either related to your illness or your being furloughed or anything like that?
No, I think, it certainly made me more aware of what needs to be done, and so as a result, I caution other people as much as I can, because the way to keep things under control and be able to do your normal activities is to protect yourself and protect other people. I have found that grocery stores they're pretty good. People are pretty good about wearing a mask, and that's a good thing. I think more so in New York than in Pennsylvania. But yeah, I think I had a friend who was never diagnosed with COVID, but was very sick back in January. And she told me she's really just now able to walk 2 miles. You know, it took such a long time because she was very sick, and of course nobody could figure out what was wrong with her. You know, she went to the hospital, she had her heart was involved. She'd never had those issues before. It just didn't make any sense. And so I think that the problem that we have is that it's not just like the flu, and it just depends on how you react, and who knows what that is, what the cause of that is. You know, is it how much exposure you had, or is it just how your body functions, or what situation you're in at the moment? Like I guess I should say this. I really was pretty run down after the trip. So that would explain to me at least why I got sick and my husband didn't. He was actually pretty rested after the trips, which was good because he had to jump right into that difficult job.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for speaking with me.
You're very welcome.